It was a struggle at the beginning, obviously. At the time, 30 years ago, or 31 years ago now, the idea of countries breaking up was simply not accepted. And so when Slovenia and Croatia declared their independence, there was a lot of opposition. And then later that year, the Soviet Union broke up. And so that was one factor that made this all much easier. I think the international community, including the United States at that time, really took the wrong approach. Because the problem was not the breakup of Yugoslavia or the independence of Croatia and Slovenia. My view is that if people want to have their own state, they should have it. The problem was the war. And so instead of focusing on holding Yugoslavia together, the focus ought to have been on preventing the war. That was the great tragedy. As I look back 30 years, we had a lot of diplomacy during those first years, and I was very, very much involved in that. I think what I had always hoped was that from a diplomatic point of view, Croatia would become a very boring country. And I think that's a success. Croatia is diplomatically a kind of boring country. It's just a normal country, part of the European Union, part of NATO. It has its voice. Not a big voice, but it's a peaceful, prosperous, democratic country. That's the success.
How do you assess the current relationship between the United States and Croatia?
It's not anywhere what it was when I was ambassador, because the United States was so active at that time. Europe basically was unable to deal with the crisis, and the United States was in a position that was almost unique with the end of the Soviet Union. Our U.S. power in the world is also diminished in this century, including to, it was always going to happen, but big mistakes by George Bush and also Donald Trump. The U.S. role was diminished because Croatia is part of Europe. It's part of the European, part of NATO, and there's no crisis. I mean, America was here because there was a war. We're still here. We still have good relations. We're still the leader of NATO, but it's it's not the same. And again, that's how it should be. That's a success.
Finally, as a witness of that time, as a witness of the mid-90s, there are still some issues that are a huge burden between countries, especially between Serbia and Croatia. And now there's the issue of the universal jurisdiction that Serbia is claiming to be able to have in order to make indictments against Croatian generals, air pilots, fighting pilots, etc. Do you remember any cases of war crimes in the 90s that Serbia is trying to push currently against Croatia that were not judged or that were not, taken into consideration through the ICTY and appropriate judicial institutions?
I think the process that took place was extremely important, very good, very fair. The ICTY indicted something like 103 people, 160 people. Every single one of them met justice. I mean, some died, but there's nobody who's at large. And then the rest of the process was a national process in the countries where the crimes took place. And so I'm a little unclear as to how Serbia, where basically none of the crimes took place, could be exercising jurisdiction over things that took place in Croatia or in Bosnia. Although I haven't followed it that closely, my understanding is that there has been accountability in Croatia for crimes that were committed against Croatian Serbs. So it's not as if Croatia has, swept this under the carpet. So, after 30 years, it also becomes a long time.
Thank you so much.